like me are newer to the Valley and you chose the St. Croix Valley as the place you wanted to call home. Whichever the case, and whether you are connected throughout the Valley or have a primary affinity with one specific community, you recognize that what we have here is something special. When we think about our mission to improve quality of life in the St. Croix Valley, we think about quality of life for all who live, work, and play here today and for generations to come. And we recognize that we have a responsibility to care for this special place and the people, places, and natural resources throughout it. It's our hope that this placemaking conversation and the ones that follow throughout this year's series will not only raise awareness and spark ideas, but will ultimately lead to collaborative action and community impact. Our speaker today is an expert on just that, taking action to improve community life. So before I introduce our speaker, just a few words about today's Zoom format. One, to keep things moving smoothly, we have muted all participants. Two, we suggest putting Zoom on speaker view so that the majority of your screen is filled with our speaker. But for those of you who enjoy scrolling through and seeing who's with us today, you can also go to gallery view and view all of the attendees. Finally, we will have time for questions at the end. If you do have questions, please type them into the chat box, which you can access, for most of you at least, at the bottom of your screen. I should add to that I just had an opportunity to speak with our speaker, and she commented more than once that this is not a one-shot deal, and invited folks who don't have a chance to have their questions answered during today's program to reach out to her, and we'll provide you with a way to do that at the end of the program. So now I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Katherine Loflin. For over a decade, Dr. Laughlin has been an award-winning trailblazer on place attachment, what makes people love their city, and why that matters to economic vitality and individual well-being. She is actually a global authority on this area and has become known as the City Doctor through her research, including the Knight Foundation's Soul of the Community project, plus her book entitled Place Match and her TED Talks. Again, we will provide you with links to those after today's program. Now, before all of this place work, Dr. Laughlin received her master's and PhD in social work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She is also well-versed in the workings of the philanthropic and nonprofit sector. She served as executive director of 2 nonprofits in her home state of North Carolina, and she had leadership roles with the Knight Foundation in the state of Florida. She has presented to the United Nations, the Gallup Organization, the Asian Pacific Mayors Forum, the National Association of Realtors, and now she'll be able to add the St. Croix Valley Foundation to that prestigious list. Dr. Laughlin, thank you so much for being with us today. The virtual microphone is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have to say, one of the things I did at Knight Foundation was I ran our community foundation program in 26 communities. And when we talk about place attachment and the power of place, I know firsthand the power of community foundations to really be the soul keeper of a place. And so I'm always excited to be able to come and present to a group hosted by a community foundation, because I entrust in them the message that will continue a conversation long past when I'm gone from it. So I always try to go out of my way to make sure I can present at any community foundation invitation that I get, because I do think they are so critical to the conversation around place and it being actually grounded in reality of what the place is experiencing and going through as that neutral convener. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Give me just a second to do that. And we will start. There we go. And let me do one other thing so you can see better. Okay. So making the case for place is what we ended up settling on for this conversation. Maybe because it is officially 10 years ago that I first took a TED stage to talk as the first person ever on a TED stage to talk about this topic of place and place attachment. It happened at a time when I think we were just beginning to understand the power of place. And 10 years later, I have to say, this has not been a shiny penny. This has been something that has continued to be a very hot topic and has spread really throughout not just the philanthropic sector, but the tourism sector and the college sector and the talent recruitment and retention CEO sector, and all of these other places that I did not always see coming, because it is such a universally important concept to understand one of the primary ways that places work and how we can help optimize places to be the best that they can be. So I started with almost a defensive posture, if you will, with making the case for place. You know, it wasn't a very flowery, it was a very kind of persuasive argument. And in today's world, persuasion is required data. And one of the things that I brought to the table with a background in social work was a completely different look. I am not an architect. I am not a planner. I don't want to talk about zoning. These are things that you don't want me for. What you want me for is to talk about the power of place to change not only places, but also the individuals within them and understand the human side of place and how it relates to those hard economic outcomes. So let's start. And I know we have people in the audience, different levels of understanding about what is placemaking. Why are we talking about this? Give me some background. So let me start with a little bit of background on the role of place today. Now, when you get a shrink, you get Maslow. And my background, I was supposed to be a marriage and family therapist. So, you know, and here I am. Long story. Read the book. It's very entertaining. But I start with a very basic understanding of the power of place from a psychological perspective. And that's where we get Maslow. So if you know anything about the hierarchy of needs, a lot of time when we talk about funding and understanding the needs of our community, whether we know it or not, we refer to Maslow, because at the basic, people need food, water, shelter, sleep, sleep, and Maslow, sleep. So we need those basics. And then we need to feel a sense of safety. This is hardwired in us from when we were running from the dinosaurs. You know, we want to feel that we have a safe environment. And then right after that, so that's pretty basic stuff. Right after that, we as humans require a sense of belonging and attachment. We need to feel like we belong, whether with a tribe, with a community, with our place, because that is the basis from which positive relationships grow, and we can move on to those next levels, which look at that: esteem, being able to feel like you can achieve, that you're worthy, all of those things, and then living to your highest potential. Maslow was pretty clear that these are steps that are directional. You know, you have to move through these things in that order. And sometimes we fall back down and we have to go back through those stages again. But attachment and feeling a sense of belonging to yourself, your family, your community, your workplace, your place is all part of achieving what we want for all of our community members, which is to be the best citizens, residents, parents, employees, employers, religious leaders that they can be. So it's important to ground it in something kind of important that I think we miss if we don't first talk about why is this stuff important. Now, on top of that, in the past, since I've been doing this work, I did the TED 10 years ago, the first one, but it's been about 15 years since we even started this journey. There has been increasing data that's showing from different sectors how the power of place is really changing. So number one, so when I started, probably in 2010 was the first time Gallup started talking about their findings that talent was starting to choose a place over a job. which was completely different than the way a lot of our cities have been designed and economically motivated, if you will, to attract and retain talent. It was about the job. It was not about the place. And we started seeing increasingly that young talent was instead choosing a place and then doing something that terrified parents all across the country, which was showing up in a place without a plan, but just wanted to live there so badly that, oh, I'll just show up there and figure it out once I get there, which is completely not the way we usually decide our futures in our country traditionally. So they really changed the conversation around place with this first data point that, to me, was the moment that I thought things are changing. Things are changing in the way that place needs to market itself, but also in how we present who we are as a place to others. And this also helped a lot of businesses start to understand that this is not a touchy-feely subject. This is not something that we do to make ourselves feel better about our place. It is critical to our own economic development. So that was our first hint. Then we started to see some really interesting data around, even if you're able to attract the person to the job, even if you get them in there, job satisfaction is tied to feelings about the place. And I can't tell you how many stories I heard probably between 2008 and 2012. And if I went back now, I probably would hear even more about people saying, I'm quitting, not because this job is bad, but because this place is bad. And I can't make it work for me. I can't make it work for my family. Or the opposite was also happening as those things sort of moved together. People were saying, this job is not my favorite in the world, but I love it here. And it provides a means by which I can stay in this community. So I am no longer living to work, I'm working to live. So I'm going to make this work here for me. So seeing that those two things mattered, even once you get them outside the door, inside the door of your employment, keeping them there was a function of their relationship with the place. And then, of course, what Soul of the Community, which I'll talk about shortly, brought to the table was that economic growth has a very tight relationship with how much people love where they live, that there is an emotional component to economic development. And that is not that rich places feel good about being rich places, but that it's a function of growing, that economies get stronger the more that people who live there love being there and find it as their place of belonging, if you will. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that relationship might be working when we get more into the soul data. And then, of course, this whole idea of, everybody's talking about branding and marketing your place, and the awards that I've won on my work has come from city branding kind of competitions that I didn't apply for, which is interesting because I sort of have a love-hate relationship with those concepts. I think that to some extent it's important to have an identity as a place, but I think far too often we create manufactured identities that don't feel authentic to the people who live in them. And then we want to sort of force it down their throats and then are surprised when there's resistance. So the whole branding concept of places, I think, is important. I think the way we go about it historically and kind of at this point is like laundry detergent. And I can't think of a place like that. I need to think of a place as, what does it authentically represent? What is its competitive advantage? And that's the basis of the brand. What attaches people there, that's the basis of the brand. So you have to know your place. You can't skip your homework. And I think a lot of branding organizations want to skip that. And that's why when you look at a place brand, you can't tell. It could be anywhere USA. It could have been my town, your town, anybody's town. It just had a few words in it that were universally appealing, but didn't really represent the soul of the community. And there's a lot of talk, and there still will be, about quality of life. And a lot of people, I think, use quality of life as sort of the same way that social capital went. I loved social capital. My dissertation was on social capital, but soon social capital became about everything. And when something becomes about everything, it isn't about anything. So quality of life, everybody said, we have quality of life. Do you have quality of life? It was like this weird handshake at place conferences where people would just talk about quality of life and nobody really knew, what does that mean and what does it look like? And for me, I try to present a definition of quality of life. Quality of life occurs at the nexus between having things in a place that we know drive attachment. So having that recipe, if you will, but also the people in that place finding it the right recipe for them. So far too often people say, well, we've done the checklist. We have this and we have this, and so everybody should love us. Well, not everybody does love you. And that's why, when these lists come out, and I get very angry emails from people who say, this is supposed to be the most livable city in the country, and I hate it here. Well, that's because we're still humans, and humans still interact with their environment based on individual differences. And so quality of life is only quality of life if it feels like quality of life to you. And that's sometimes what the attachment conversation brings into the quality of life conversation that makes people go, oh yeah, we're talking about people. So it's not as simple as a recipe. And finally, I think one of the most rewarding things for me in this work has been how we're still building the plane while we're flying it. Attachment is a relative, place attachment anyway. Now think about it, human attachment, if you think about bonding and you look at child development research and how important that is, and if you don't have bonding early on and identity, how it's bad for the outcomes of a human. That's old data that we still look to today. But the idea of transferring those concepts to a place and our relationship with a place and bonding and feeling a sense of belonging and all of that, that's relatively new. I would say in the past 10 years or so. So maybe a little bit longer. But we're still learning new things. This is an exciting field for that reason. But one of the things that we're very clear in seeing is that not only are place outcomes affected by how much people love living there, but individual outcomes come from living there. So the best way I can describe it is in social work, in my background, we have this really fundamental concept that has been shared in sociology and business psychology and psychiatry and all this stuff. And it's called person and environment fit. And it goes back again to the very basics that we as individuals have to feel a fit with our environment. And when we feel a fit to that environment, we do things in that environment that sustain it. We behave in certain ways because we don't want to lose this environment that is feeding us this really important thing for our own well-being. So we do things that support that environment. And then that environment continues to be that place that we feel like we belong. So in that symbiotic kind of relationship, you can understand pretty quickly that when this works well, you don't only have places blossoming under the love of its residents, but you also have people blossoming under the love of that relationship because they don't want to see it fail. Now, the reason why I wrote Place Match, and it's really about a resident's view of how do you find that place where you belong. I use a marriage theme because, again, marriage and family therapy was supposed to be what I did. But it's basically the idea that finding the right place to live is a lot like finding the right spouse. And it follows a similar trajectory. So when you hear me talking about attachment and loving where you live, that doesn't mean you don't get angry. That doesn't mean you're not disappointed. Every day is lovely. And think about it as a marriage or a dating relationship. We're going through a divorce. Not all relationships are forever. That idea holds very strongly in the concepts that we're going to be talking about today. So when I talk about this relationship, this symbiotic relationship and individual outcomes, we thrive when our relationship is providing what we need, not to sound too codependent on that, but it does matter. And so if you think of it in that way, it really helps to really understand some of the concepts we'll be talking about today. So What makes a loved place? Let me see if that's going to fix or not. There we go. In basic terms, what sent me, around the world was the Night Soul of the Community project. We had 2 simple research questions that we didn't have any idea what the answer would be. It was completely exploratory in 2008. And it was, what makes people love where they live and why does it matter? Night was a place-based and still is a place-based national foundation. And after giving, $100 million into these places and seeing technology change community and, well, do we still need a place? Does place still matter? Night wanted to have a better understanding of what is it about a place that makes us whole as people, and can we tweak it? Can we make it better? How do we invest in community at the end of the day to help that relationship along? So we started with we worked with the Gallup organization, who was our pollster. And you may not know this, but Gallup has actually worked for decades in the employee engagement world. They really wanted to understand, if an employee loves their job, are they better at it? If an employee is attached to their job, does it help the bottom line of companies? And Gallup's decades of research really showed that it does. So our idea was, can we take that basic idea and translate it to a community setting and see if people are more engaged, attached, like their place? Does it do anything for the person or the place? And so to do that, the first thing you have to do is figure out if you can measure that thing called attachment. Can we measure people's feelings about a place? Now, at the time, a lot of mayors and governors and around the world leaders thought they were doing that because they were measuring satisfaction. How satisfied are you living here? How satisfied are you with your garbage pickup? How satisfied are you, that kind of, how satisfied are you with your leadership? And what we sort of posited based on Gallup's, again, employee engagement data is that it's more complicated than that. Satisfaction is good, but not sufficient. I was in Newfoundland, probably 8 years ago, and I was trying to explain the difference between attachment and satisfaction. And this gentleman stood up, and I'll never forget it because it's the best example I've ever heard on this concept. He goes, I think I know the difference between satisfaction and attachment. He said, my wife and I have lived a lot of different places. And I will never forget a Sunday morning. We were doing what we always do on Sunday. We were reading the paper. And she sort of did that thing that we do when we sort of pulled the paper down and looked across at him and said, we've lived in a lot of places and it's been fine, but this is the first place I never want to leave. And so that it's fine versus I never want to leave, you start to understand the difference between satisfaction and attachment. So if you look at those other things in the heart, outlook. So how optimistic are you about your community's future? Because the more optimistic you are about its future, the more attached you are to it today. Do you recommend this place to other people as a place to live? Is it the perfect place for you? Not the perfect place, but the perfect place for you. And do you have a level of satisfaction for living here? And do you have a sense of pride? What we found is, in all the things we looked at that could possibly define love of place, these are the things that were that hung together in really describing this concept. And what was interesting to me is that some of those things in the heart matter more than others to the attachment, because some communities would say to me, good gracious, oh goodness, where do we start? If we had to pick one of those things, what would we work on? If we could let one of them go, what would we not work on? And interestingly enough, outlook, feeling optimistic about your community's future, matters a little bit more than those other things. Recommending the place to other people matters a little bit less, which was always fascinating to me. So when we had this research come out and I would go to the 26 communities and talk about it, I would ask people, like, why do you think recommending the place didn't matter as much to attachment as some of these other things on paper? I mean, this is like tea leaves. Help me understand it. And actually, it was a group in the Twin Cities who said to me, Somebody said, I think I know why. And I said, why? And they said, because if you love where you live, you don't really want to screw it up by telling everybody about it. You want to sort of keep it like, this is good, right? We like our size. We kind of get it. We know what's going on, so we're not going to go, the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. And I thought that was a pretty interesting concept. So anyway, so this is sort of the journey of understanding attachment, which to me, I thought was groundbreaking in and of itself. But to be fair, I believe in actionable research, or don't bother doing it. Don't ask a question unless you're going to do something with what you find out about it. And to me, I understood that going into a community and saying, you need to really work on your optimism. And if you could do that, you'll be in better shape, toodles. It wasn't going to help that place. So what we needed to understand is, well, what are the things about a place that drive those feelings? And if we understand the things about the place that drive those feelings, now we have something to intervene on, right? Now we have something to invest in. Now we have something to get better educated about how we're doing. And so we studied like 12 things about a place, and it was everything, a lot of things, from basic services to leadership, to the local economy, to the things you see over there in the blue box, the key place characteristics. And what we found was, no matter where we studied, whether it was Macon, Georgia, or Detroit, Michigan, all 3 years of the study, every place we studied, the same 3 things mattered the most in driving those feelings. And they were the softer sides of place. It wasn't garbage collection. It wasn't even leadership. It was these 3 things. Is there an opportunity to be socially active in a community in a way that fits your needs? Do you have a sense of pride in the way the built part of your community and the natural part of your community present itself to you, the aesthetics? And do you think you and the people around you feel comfortable in their skin in your community? Now I'm going to pull back again to marriage. Stick with me for a minute on this, because these concepts and how we talked about them, social offerings, aesthetics, and openness, those are sort of researchy kind of words that I'm going to explain a little, unpack for us. But here's an easy way to think about it. When you talk to people who've been married for a long time, and you listen to what it was, or even people who are dating newly and are getting ready to get married, what is it that they hear? What is it that they talk about this relationship? And I would wager that it comes down to basically, this is somebody I can have a good time with. This is somebody I can look at and not want to throw up and enjoy. And this is someone who I feel like is okay with who I am, and I'm okay with who they are. So when you think about it in that sense, this is what we're looking for in our place, this sense of human acceptance, connection, and the ability to be proud of our environment and to interact in it in the way we want. So if you can work on those things about a place, you could change levels of attachment. So as we continue to do this research, we found that if you change just one of those things, people's perceptions of just one of those things, you could see attachment levels change by the time we measured it again. This is not like civic engagement and social capital that can take forever to build and a moment to destroy. These are things that if you are strategic and surgical, you can all of a sudden not say, well, good Lord, what do we do? Where do we start? I can tell you where to start. You start there. And that will enable you to get those attachment levels to change. Now, why do we care about that? Well, so what? So what? Attachment levels change. What does that do? Well, it does provide some level of attachment and love of place, which is good because it creates that symbiotic relationship I was talking about before. But we also measured it along some hard administrative outcomes that most communities traditionally measure themselves by. And the one that really stood out to us because of its strength was the ability of the GDP, the economy, the local economy to grow under environments where attachment was high. Now, does this mean that GDP growth completely depends only on attachment? Absolutely not. But what it does say is when you think about economic development in our country, it has never really, until the past 10 years, included place at that table. And so I am very proud of getting place at the table of economic development because it matters. It's not the whole enchilada, but it was certainly not part of the enchilada we had at the table before. So it was a powerful change in the way we viewed things. But attachment also helps with public health seeking behaviors among the elderly. It also helps with school dropout and lessening that. So because this data has been out for 10 years or more now, I still have doctoral students mining this data. And so I still hear, Dr. Laughlin, I just found a connection between attachment and blah. And so that's how I know it matters for school dropouts, my students. I know it matters for public health seeking behaviors and lots of other things that we're still discovering. And just so you know, we did study 26 cities, 43,000 people with Gallup, different languages, the whole shebang. We can talk about methodology if you want, and offline certainly after today. Okay, so this is, just hang with me for a second. Let me go back. Yep. One of the most powerful things, if you are in the business of community, that I wish to leave you with today around placemaking is this idea that we need to study two separate things about our places. We need to understand what things are important for X, what things are important to get people to stay in our community, what things are important, in my example, to attachment and belonging. That's only one thing, what matters. And then there's another axis. How are we doing on that, whatever it is that matters to us? Because if you only study one of those, you're going to get a very stilted view of what to do about it. You might figure out, oh, okay, these things matter for attachment. But don't you want to know how you're already doing on those things before you start to intervene? Because some of them might be maintenance, some of them might be intervention. And so this is how I was able to help community foundations and regular foundations, again, get a workable roadmap for their community, because we could place it out in what I call a 2x2 table of strengths and opportunities. So your strengths, just follow the chart here, is things that matter for attachment. And your community is perceived as doing pretty well on those things, according to resident reports. Why is strengths important? Because nobody, especially in 2008 and 2010, that time period that I was doing this work, nobody was talking about strengths in a community. So when I went to Milledgeville, Georgia, or I went to Detroit in 2009, they were like this, because there was just that time expose, Detroit is dying, all this other stuff. Nobody comes in there anymore and leads with strengths. And so what I was able to do is, no matter where your place was and what it was going through, Gary, Indiana, I could at least say, hey, here's a starting point of something that's going well that matters for you. And then let's look at where we need to be doing the work, because our deficit-based conversations around place are doing nobody any good. And this isn't about, being flowery to people and making them, this is data-derived information. Everybody needs to know what they're getting right before you can expect them to have an engaged conversation about what they need to be doing better at. That's just basic psychology. Ask your boss during your performance review, right? So strengths, and then opportunities or weaknesses. Again, that's a language thing, but language matters in community practice. Opportunities are the things that matter for attachment, and we're not doing so hot on it, according to resident perception. And then beneath that is things that don't matter really for attachment, and things we're doing great on, and things we're not doing great on. What's fascinating about those lower priority areas is those are the things that your mayor and your county commissioners and your city council like to talk about a lot. And that's changing too. But back in the day, this is where garbage collection falls, and this is where potholes fall, and this is where some things that, they're important. We still have to have our garbage picked up in our communities. There's no changing that. But when you're talking about what makes people fall in love with you as a place, It's not around garbage collection, because we generally expect every place we live is going to pick up our garbage, right? That's not what's going to tip us in being in love with that place. So you have to remember that that's the metric that we're shooting for. Because why attachment? Because it's got a stickiness that we want. Okay, it's beyond just, it's fine, they pick up my garbage. So again, when you're talking about why can I not leave this place? It's not going to be around garbage attachment, garbage pickup, because that should be happening everywhere. It's going to be about something else. So with that, let me show you what, before COVID, this is what basically every single community map, there were some variations. This is a national look at what was driving people's attachment to their place in 2009, 2010. And you can see pretty much what I was saying. There's aesthetics, there's social offerings, there's openness, and then education started making this comeback here, which was really fascinating. But anyway, you can see that for a lot of places, they like their aesthetics. Their social offerings is, we're trying, we're making progress. Openness was always a struggle. And education, which in a lot of places was completely propelled by a local university being in that place. So that is not about public school education, K through 12. That's about higher ed perceptions, and that being a sense of pride for the community. These were the things that we could go in and say, okay, your aesthetics, people enjoy that. There's a sense of pride about your higher ed, the research going on there, blah, 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 blah. How can we leverage that to be more better at social offerings? How can we leverage your aesthetics to be better at social events and social offerings in your community? How can we leverage your aesthetics or your education systems to make people feel like anyone could make a life for themselves here? These were the things. And if you look down here, you see social capital and safety and the economy and leadership. And we'll talk about wow, those don't really seem to matter for attachment. And that's what that means down there. They don't really seem to matter. Why is that? Well, again, a lot of that has to do with the expectations we have of what any community should be able to provide us versus the things that make us fall in love with where we live. This was pre-COVID. Now, I did a study in Corpus Christi, Texas. So this is only one community, but it's the one community that's come to me since COVID and said, do an attachment study on us. And what we have found is some changing to the map, primarily the social offerings. If anyone is surprised, you shouldn't be, because there hasn't been any that we've been sort of allowed to do. Now, this survey was about a year ago, so it was really kind of locked down back then. And what's fascinating to me is social offerings and social capital kind of did a switcheroo. What does that mean? Because social capital is about individual relationships, individual networks. Before COVID, I think the reason why social capital didn't drive attachment is because, again, people thought that they could get those needs met different ways. They didn't rely on their community to provide that for them. They relied on their community to provide their social offerings. What is there to do here? And when COVID happened, the community no longer provided that. And so we as humans do what humans do, and we adapted. We started seeking ways to connect one-on-one safely, online, other ways to get our social needs met. And what we learned is that we can find a way to get around that if push comes to shove. We still have to be social. We'll just scale down our metrics on how social we can be. So it was really fascinating, but that was the only thing that really changed. Aesthetics and openness and all that stayed where it was. It was just the social offerings thing that switched. There was lots of really interesting things about COVID and what that's done to attachment, and we can probably talk more about that. Just want to make sure I get through. We have a lot to share today. So let me go back. Okay. So what do? How do you showcase those things that matter the most for driving attachment? Well, you got to know your identity as a place, which gets back to my lecture a little earlier about how your place isn't laundry detergent. You have to actually know your place. So here's a funny, if you can see it, here's a funny thing that, like, our communities at the most micro level have cultures that we need to embrace. Social offerings, aesthetics, and openness only tells you what to do if you place it within the culture of a place. So I live in North Carolina. I'm a North Carolina girl, 100%. Social offerings here look a lot different than social offerings in New York City. And both would say there's a lot to do in both places, but it's how you do them that tells you who you are as a place. So you have to know that this is how Hawaiians stand in line, which is brilliant. What have we been doing? This makes me sick. I mean, every time I see it, I'm like, this is brilliant, because there's a sense of social norms and mores that tell you this is, you put your shoes there and sit down. You don't need to stand there and get all huffy puffy about who's breaking and who's doing what. This is part of the culture of the place. I live in North Carolina. This is what happens when it snows here. Every time. It's getting ready to happen this weekend. The panic on the streets here is palpable. So my point here is that you have to, again, a marriage, you have to love and know the things about your place that make it what it is. That's a strength, and the bless your heart moments, which, he snores, she's always late, whatever you want to say. There's good things about our place narrative, and there's bad things about our place narrative. I show this because this was our belt line a few years ago when it snowed 2 inches. And because we don't drive, we can't do this. And we have all of y'all come in here who can drive in this. And it's one of these moments where people are after this happened, actually, a group of guys who moved from other places went on the news because children slept in their schools that night because their parents couldn't get to them. Okay. It was like the end of the world. I've seen memes of this with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, Godzilla. It was that level. I mean, it was really a nightmare. And they said, well, let us teach you. Let us teach you. We're going to do these driving in snow classes at the libraries, and you guys come out, and the news covered it, and the guys are out there. Nobody came. Nobody came because we're going to be at home with our mint juleps and our canned goods and just waiting for this to pass, because it's not who we are. So again, you have to know who you are as a place and the strengths and where you're and I'm being cute here, but there are also underbellies of our narrative. For example, I would like to think we would be open to having different kinds of people living here, but I'm kind of glad we've never been tested. You see what I'm saying? There's other parts of narratives that are underbellies that aren't as cute as this, even though this is not very cute, but you get what I'm saying. So you have to learn and dissect those parts of who you are. So let's talk about social offerings. There's 2 things I want you guys, and then I'm going to shut up. I'm going to go through these quickly, and then I'm going to end and get your questions. If you can only do one thing to grow attachment, grow your social offerings. And let me explain to you what social offerings are. Social offerings are 2 things. It is the entertainment infrastructure. So the pay-to-plays, the restaurants, the downtown, there's things to do, the festivals, all that stuff. Those are really important. And then there's the choose your own adventure, what I call choose your own adventure in a community, where every Friday or Saturday afternoon, you and your family could find something to do that you would enjoy. That's not necessarily the big festival or the big thing. You can just go and do it. So having that established event structure and this always waiting for you opportunities are where social offerings really thrive. Now, having said that, one of the things we saw in the data very clearly is if you look at a place like Miami, where I used to live for 10 years, they have social offerings out the wazoo. I mean, but as a North Carolina girl, when I went in those social environments, I was not, it wasn't my scene. It was a little different than what I expected, because I expect eye contact and civility in a grocery store, because that's where I grew up. But in Miami, eye contact and talking to people are sort of staying in their own swim lane. That's looked sort of like New York, though that's changing some in New York. So the point being is that it has to have a level of civility within those social offerings that is representative of your culture as a place. If you guys, make eye contact at the grocery store and say hi to strangers and all that other stuff, that's the level of civility that is part of that community that you have to hold on to. And people who are looking for more, I'm just here to buy corn, I really don't need your recipe on how to make corn on the cob kind of thing, then they might not feel that level of connection that what your place is offering. That's okay. That's okay. Our job is not to be all things for all people. Our job is to be the best we can be and have people naturally attached to what it is that we offer. So aesthetics. This is the second most important thing in driving people's attachment. And aesthetics is two things, the built environment and the natural environment. So a lot of cities, and I will just quickly say, used to think that aesthetics was extra. It's the first thing that got redlined when budgets got tight, and I get it. But what Sol came through and said very clearly is you cannot just get rid of this and think it doesn't have a consequence to your place. Because people derive their sense of pride through looking around and feeling a sense of connection to that environment in whatever way it's presented. And openness is really the way we measured it, is how well could anybody, not just the historically disenfranchised groups, but how well could anybody come and make a life for themselves in your place? So that means we do, of course, want that for the historically disenfranchised groups. But we also want to take people, are we a cradle to grave kind of place? And it's really hard to be a cradle to grave kind of place. Do young people like it? Young professionals, singles, married with children's, elderly, retired, it's not just about certain demographics, because again, we minimize who we are as humans when we do that. So I am a half Hispanic divorced woman who just turned 50 with a teen living at home. I am all those things. If you just see me as a half Hispanic, you lose a lot of my dimension that I look for in a place. So the point being is that openness has to be not, are we doing a good job in being open and welcoming to some, but are we doing a good job of being open and welcoming to all? People on bicycles, people in wheelchairs. And that's where things you don't think about matter for placemaking matter, like sidewalks. Because sidewalks send a message about who's welcome and who's not welcome in our community based on our ability to share a message about, hey, we get it. We get what your needs are here. And I'm not going to, I'll just run through, I'll take 2 minutes. So here are some projects over the past, 15 years, and sort of the theme of them. One of them was Our Miami. And what Our Miami looked at was, what is the difference between perception and reality? So the thing about Soul of the Community is we're talking about perception because perception is reality. But if you're a funder or you're a community leader, you need to think about, well, what do I need to do? Do I need to build a bigger mousetrap? Or do I just need to let people know we have these mousetraps? Because what we tend to do is like, okay, Performing Arts Center, $50 million. Well, I don't know. Did you look at your opinion data and your administrative data and say, well, actually, we do have a lot going on. Obviously, people don't know about it. That's our intervention. So Miami was like perception versus reality project. And it got actually a lot of national awards because it helped people know how to invest in their community. One of my projects has been, I started a production company that tells the stories of place on stage. Because I'm telling you guys, I've done this work and I've helped communities spend a lot of money on placemaking. I've never seen something move, and I've measured this, people's attachment to the place than a 2-hour live show about telling the true history of a place back to its community. And here's the cool part. You support the local arts. And oh, by the way, they make money. They make money. Every show I've ever done has been sold out for its entire run because nobody has done that before for folks. So I get involved. I'm in the shows. I'm the this lady, and then I'm the dead version of this lady on the haunted history tours in October, because I believe in this so much. And you see the nice lady, the blonde holding, and that's my child. I make her do it too. And the nice lady behind us, I had another show about North Carolina's job role in the Constitutional Convention, which won a national award. And I made her be Ben Franklin, because she's a town councilwoman. I had the mayor as George Washington, and people came out in droves because these people aren't actors. They were good. I got them to a good place, but people wanted to see the story, but they also wanted to see the mayor as George Washington. I mean, where are you going to get that every single day? And these events make a lot of money. In Newfoundland, they do story maps. So I encourage you to look up Hearsay. This is one of my communities as well, where you can walk along and you get a little QR code, Hear About Here. And you scan the QR code and you get an audio file of a resident talking in resident voice about what happened on that spot that mattered to them. It could have been where their parents met. It could have been the first time there was a mine explosion. I mean, good, bad, and indifferent. And it is an unbelievable project. And needless to say, if it costs more than $500, I'll eat my hat. I mean, these things do not have to be expensive. I encourage you to also find ways to create. Making money is a very popular idea, but anything that creates your community into the home of a scavenger hunt. For this, it was money that was ripped in half, and you had to find your match. You had to match those icons about Macon, the lovely magnolias and the architecture and the butterflies. They were different ones on each currency, and you had to find your match. And when you found your match, you met somebody you maybe didn't know, or maybe you did. And you either spent your money, because it counted as money in Macon, collectively at a locally owned business. So again, full circle. How can we help businesses? How can we bring people together to meet and bridging social capital? And how can we use our community as the playground for all of that? So that really does finish me up. I am happy to stay later to answer any questions. I did write this book about marriage, being like finding the right place to live. And because I have so many leaders on the call, let me just say, I have a chapter in the book called Mayor as Mother-in-Law, or Leadership as Mother-in-Law. And so if I can leave you with one thing from that, it's this: your job is to facilitate the relationship between people in their place. We all know what a good mother-in-law is. We all know what a bad mother-in-law is. And I hate to be down on women because, hey, we make everything happen. Let's just be honest. But some of us think we know everything sometimes. And I think leaders are the same way. We tend to pat our residents on the head and say, we'll take care of it for you. We know best. We know what we're doing. And we can be, mother-in-laws can on their worst day be intrusive and judgmental and not make room for the relationship of the couple. Instead, our job as leaders is to say, how can I facilitate this relationship to be the best it can be? What can I provide you? When can I step back? When can I lead? And if we take that approach and understanding that we're facilitating a relationship between people in their place, our roles as leaders should look a little different in how we go from day to day. How do we invest? And how do we make sure that everybody who wants to live there can live there and love that place to call home as much as we do? And that is truly the end of my presentation. And I'm happy to take questions for as long as you guys want.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Laughlin. Just let me throw a couple that popped up in chat, and maybe you can choose kind of where to go, and maybe you're able to craft a response that addresses more than one of them.
Okay.
There was a question about kind of first impressions of place versus perceptions of place that build over time. There was a question about trust and the role to which trust plays a role in this. And then also a question about communities within communities, a church community that's part of a city, that's part of a region, and how that all plays out.
Okay.
One or more of those, please.
All right. So here's what I'll say. And I see that my candles are creating lovely prisms on my face now that I can see myself again. So sorry about that. Wow, psychedelic. A couple of things I will say about that. First of all, so the first and most consistent message you send about your place is through your aesthetics. So when you talk about first impressions, when you talk about building over time, this is the reason why aesthetics, I'm trying to move. This is why aesthetics matters as much as it does. When all else fails and you're not running a festival and you're not having a social offering and you're not being considerate to your fellow neighbor, we're driving to work, we're driving home. And what we see around us sends us messages about our place, whether they're places to be proud of or places not to be proud of. And that happens the moment a real estate agent is showing you that place for the first time. So this is why aesthetics matter so much. And ask any real estate agent in the world, they will tell you there's certain routes they take and certain routes they won't take because they're trying to sell that place through its aesthetics, because it's the nonverbal message. So yes, they accumulate over time and we get more dimension to that perception, but it starts with aesthetics. Now, social trust and trust in general. I did some research almost 20 years ago that said very clearly, the longer your commute time, the less your social trust. What does that mean? And the more graffiti you see on the way, and the more blight you see on the way, and the more bad behavior you see on the way, the more it decreases your social trust. So what does that mean? Again, it means that people's experience in your community in times and in place that you don't think matter. Social trust is built and destroyed by things like the way people behave on the streets. And if you see on your neighborhood app, hey, I found a wallet on the park bench, please contact me. There's something in your heart that feels better in that moment because you're living in a place where that kind of post could happen versus I have to leave this chat because I can't deal with you people because of the way we're behaving towards each other. So one of the things that my CEOs used to do when they were, and this was a big secret, I feel bad but not really bad, but that I shared this, is that they learned that people would judge their communities based on these kinds of behaviors. So they would meet with the mayor and see the great tax benefit package. And then they would send, scouts out and go sit in the Little League game and see how parents behaved. They sat at green lights to see how long it takes the car behind you to honk. I talked about this in my TED Talk because that tells them about the level of community there is in a place. Now, some places, hey, we love it that you honk at me before the lights even turn green. If that's what you want, then we can have that place. But if you want a different kind of place, we have to know who we are. And the last question, communities within communities. So I have taken this research down to the neighborhood level. I've done it at the MSA, I've done it statewide, and then I've drilled down to literally 2 blocks. And what's amazing to me is what counts as social offerings changes. So faith-based opportunities sometimes matter more at the more micro level. Neighborhood block parties that I don't have to pack my kids and drive 20 minutes to get to something. I can have it in my own backyard. Those things matter. But what's beautiful about it is those 3 things that still derive attachment don't change. It's just their scale and their location and proximity to you changes. So we still feel pretty confident that we have a good formula with those 3.
Great. Well, we are at 1 o'clock. So I think what we'll do is we will formally close, and then Dr. Laughlin, with your generous offer to stay on for a few minutes, if someone has a burning question, we'll leave that open as an option. So thank you so much, Dr. Laughlin.
Oh, you're so welcome.
These thought-provoking comments, and I think I'm sure I'm not the only one who's creating a list of resources that I want to go and read and reference after your talk.
Of course.
Thank you again to our partner and our sponsor, First State Bank and Trust. And I want to extend a special thanks to my colleague, Angie Pilgrim, our Director of Community Impact. She is really both the brain and the brawn behind the development of this program and all of our convening work. So thank you so much, Angie. Just a quick plug for our next session in February. So our next Conversations of the Valley session will be on Wednesday, February 9th, when we will focus on what's being called the built environment. And our guest speaker will be the Honorable John Robert Smith, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for the national nonprofit Smart Growth America. He's going to speak with us about the way our communities are planned and how the way they're planned, designed, and built impacts how well we all live, and about how the steps that we take now impact generations to come. So I hope you will join us. Registration for that program will open on Monday at SCV for St. Croix Valley, scvfoundation.org. At that same site, you will also find additional resources suggested both by Dr. Laughlin and previous speaking recordings and resources from our Conversations of the Valley series. So thank you again to all of you for being part of these important conversations. I look forward to seeing you virtually in February. Take care. So Angie, maybe if you want to just, or Stacy, unmute everyone.